I need to leave early tonight. I have a date. 3 simple sentences. That was all it took to paralyze the most ruthless man in Chicago. Elias didn't flinch when rival crews shot up his warehouses. He didn't blink when federal agents raided his offshore accounts. But standing in his kitchen, watching the woman who washed his coffee mugs check her reflection in the microwave door, his chest went entirely hollow. The king of the underworld had just been dethroned by his housekeeper in a cheap floral dress. Elias Mercer ran his life with the surgical precision of a mortician. There was a place for the money, a place for the violence, and a place for the silence. His penthouse, hovering 60 floors above the concrete grid of the city, was supposed to be the latter. It was a fortress of glass, steel, and cold monochrome leather. Nothing out of place. No loose ends. And then there was Nakia. Nakia King had been employed as his live-out housekeeper for 8 months. Elias had fired her 4 predecessors for various infractions. One stole a watch, another asked too many questions about the men in heavy coats who visited at midnight, and 2 were simply too terrified of him to clean properly, their hands shaking so violently they chipped his crystal decanters. Nakia did not shake. She didn't snoop. She didn't ask questions. And most infuriatingly, she didn't seem to care who he was. She was 26, chronically exhausted, and treated the head of the Mercer Syndicate like a mildly irritating roommate who left too many files on the dining table. It was a Tuesday. Outside, a miserable gray rain was steadily washing the smog out of the sky. Inside the penthouse office, the air was heavily filtered and climate-controlled to exactly 69 degrees. Elias sat behind his mahogany desk, staring at a decrypted laptop screen showing a supply chain bottleneck in the port of Miami. It was a $3 million problem. Nakia walked in carrying a microfiber cloth and a bottle of glass cleaner. She was wearing her usual uniform of faded blue jeans and an oversized gray sweater that swallowed her frame. A single white earbud was wedged in her left ear, faintly leaking the tinny bass of some terrible pop song. Elias didn't look up, but he tracked her movements perfectly. He always did. He knew exactly how many steps it took her to cross from the door to the floor-to-ceiling windows. 14. He knew she would start on the left pane and work her way right. "I need you to stay late tomorrow," Elias said, his voice flat, gravelly from a lack of sleep and too much black coffee. "I'm hosting a sit-down in the dining room. I want the silver polished and the crystal prepped. The caterers arrive at 7, but you'll manage the layout." He finally looked up, expecting her usual reluctant nod. Nakia paused, the spray bottle hovering inches from the glass. She turned to look at him, her brow furrowing. "I can't." Elias went still. He stared at her. The words took a moment to compute. In his world, "I can't" was not a phrase he heard. Men died for uttering those syllables. Politicians ruined their careers rather than say them to him. "Excuse me?" Elias kept his tone dangerously level. "I can't stay late tomorrow," Nakia repeated, entirely missing the subtle drop in the room's atmospheric pressure. She wiped a smudge off the glass with practiced efficiency. "I've been staying late all week because of your guests. But tomorrow is Wednesday. I'm leaving at 5. Elias leaned back in his chair. He closed the laptop. The soft click echoed in the large, quiet room. "I pay you a ridiculous premium for your flexibility, Nakia. If I require you at 7, you will be here at 7. Nakia sighed, a heavy, deeply put-upon sound. She walked over to his desk, smelling faintly of lemon ammonia and cheap vanilla lotion. "Elias, I'm clocking out at 5. She was the only person alive who used his first name with the exasperated tone of a tired school teacher. "I have a date tomorrow night. I need time to get ready." Elias froze. It wasn't a dramatic, cinematic freeze. It was a biological cessation of all unnecessary movement. His lungs stopped drawing air. The pen he had been rolling between his index and middle fingers halted, the cold metal biting into his skin. A date. The word hung in the sterile air of the office, thick and suffocating. Elias stared at her face. He looked at her tired hazel eyes, the faint dark circles beneath them, the messy bun slipping down the back of her neck. He had never once considered what she did when she stepped into the elevator at the end of her shift. To him, she existed only in the parameters of this penthouse. She was a fixture of his sanity, a constant. "A date," Elias repeated. The syllables tasted like ash in his mouth. "Yes, a date. It's when two adults go out in public, usually for food, to see if they can tolerate each other." Nakia offered a dry, sarcastic smile. "I know it's a foreign concept to you, considering you exclusively eat takeout in the dark, but it's a thing people do." The joke didn't land. Elias felt a sudden, violent spike of adrenaline in his chest, a dark, primal rush that he usually reserved for interrogations in damp basement rooms. He suppressed it violently, forcing his face into a mask of bored indifference. "Who?" The word slipped out before he could stop it. It was a breach of protocol. He didn't ask personal questions. Nakia looked surprised. She shifted her weight, suddenly slightly defensive. "Just a guy. Brendan. He's a middle school history teacher. We met at the laundromat." Brendan, a middle school history teacher. The absurdity of it made Elias want to put his fist through the mahogany desk. He pictured a soft-handed, khakis-wearing civilian who probably worried about standardized test scores and drove a car with good gas mileage. "A laundromat," Elias said, his voice entirely devoid of inflection. "How deeply romantic." Nakia rolled her eyes, picking up her spray bottle. "Not all of us can afford to send our clothes out to be dry cleaned by professionals, Elias. Some of us still use quarters. Anyway, I'm leaving at 5 tomorrow. You'll survive without me handing out the silver forks." She turned and walked out of the office. Elias sat in the silence for a long time. The ledger on his desk, the $3 million Miami problem, it all evaporated. He looked down at his hand. His knuckles were bone white. The heavy gold pen he had been holding was bent entirely out of shape. The next 24 hours were a masterclass in slow, agonizing psychological rot. Elias tried to work. He had an empire to run. Thursday morning involved a meeting with his capos regarding a hostile encroachment by a Russian outfit on the south side. He sat at the head of the long glass table in his secondary office downtown, projecting the aura of absolute terrifying control that kept these wolves in line. But his mind was a fractured, hostile place. While Carmine, a broad-shouldered enforcer with a penchant for breaking kneecaps, droned on about supply routes, Elias was mentally checking the time. It was 3:15 p.m. Nakia was currently in his penthouse. She was probably dusting the bookshelves. In less than 2 hours, she would leave. She would go home, take a shower, and put on something nice. For Brendan. "Boss?" Carmine's rough voice cut through the static in Elias's head. "You want I should send a message to their lieutenant? We could hit that club they operate out of." Elias blinked, his dark eyes focusing on Carmine. The enforcer instinctively flinched, leaning back slightly. Elias's gaze was dead, heavy, and infinitely cold. "No," Elias said softly. "We don't hit the club. That's loud. It invites the feds. Find the lieutenant's brother, the one who runs the legitimate import business. Ruin his credit, seize his assets through our friends at the bank, and burn his warehouses to the ground. Leave the blood out of it. Make them starve first." Carmine swallowed hard. "Yes, boss." The meeting concluded. Elias dismissed them all with a wave of his hand. Once the heavy oak door shut, leaving him alone, he reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. He had installed a state-of-the-art security system in the penthouse, complete with hidden, high-definition cameras in every common area and hallway. He rationalized it as a necessity for a man with a target on his back. He opened the encrypted app. The feed from the penthouse loaded instantly. He tapped through the cameras until he found her. Camera 4. The hallway leading to the laundry room. Nakia was there. She had finished her shift early. It was 4:45 p.m. She was standing by the utility closet, stripping off her oversized gray sweater. Elias's breath hitched, a sudden tight constriction in his throat. He shouldn't be watching. It was a violation, a pathetic, creeping voyeurism that he found beneath him. Yet his thumb hovered over the screen, unable to close the app. She wasn't naked. She had a plain white tank top on underneath. But the intimacy of the moment, watching her transition from his employee to just a woman, felt dangerously raw. She pulled a garment bag out of the closet. She had brought her clothes with her to save time. She unzipped the bag and pulled out a dress. It was dark forest green, long-sleeved but fitted. She slipped it on over her head, smoothing the fabric down her thighs. Then, she pulled the band out of her hair, shaking her head so the dark, heavy strands fell over her shoulders in natural, messy waves. She applied a quick swipe of red lipstick. Looking into the mirrored surface of the hallway closet, she looked entirely different. The tired, sarcastic Maid was gone. In her place was a vibrant, beautiful woman getting ready to give her time and attention to another man. A sharp physical ache bloomed in Elias's chest. It was a dark, ugly possessiveness. Elias Mercer was a man who owned things. He owned judges, he owned police captains, he owned city blocks. When he saw something he wanted, he took it, and he crushed anyone who stood in the way. But he didn't own her. He bought her labor for 10 hours a day, 5 days a week. The rest of her belonged to herself. The realization was intolerable. It felt like a theft. Someone was stealing something that was rightfully his, even if he had never formally claimed it. He watched the screen as she grabbed her purse and walked out of the frame. A moment later, the security log pinged. Front door. Opened. Front door. Locked. She was gone. Elias locked his phone and threw it onto the desk. It slid across the polished wood and crashed into a crystal whiskey tumbler, shattering the glass. He didn't blink. He stood up, walked to the Pinocchio mic window, and looked down at the sprawling, rain-slicked city. Somewhere down there, a middle school history teacher was sitting in a restaurant, waiting for Nakia, waiting to make her smile, waiting to ask her about her day, waiting to perhaps reach across the table and touch her hand. Elias closed his eyes. The jealousy wasn't a hot, fiery rage. It was a cold, sinking rot in his gut, a sickness. He tried to rationalize it. He told himself it was just a disruption of his routine. He liked things in their place, and Nakia, stepping out of her designated role, was simply irritating. It was a lie. He knew it was a lie. He walked back to his desk, picked up his desk phone, and dialed his head of security. "Cancel my evening," Elias ordered, his voice clipped. "Boss, you have the sit-down with the Moreno family in an hour," the voice on the other end protested gently. "I said cancel it. Reschedule for Friday. Tell them I had a logistical emergency." He slammed the phone down. He grabbed his coat. He was crossing a line, stepping over a boundary he had meticulously maintained for his own sanity. But the alternative, sitting in his empty penthouse, picturing Brendan's hands on Nakia's waist, was unacceptable. Elias didn't take his usual armored SUV. A matte black Cadillac Escalade, flanked by 2 trailing cars, tended to draw attention. Instead, he took the service elevator down to the secondary garage and found a plain, slate-gray sedan kept for low-profile errands. He slipped into the driver's seat. The leather felt cheap compared to his usual vehicles, but he didn't care. He keyed the ignition, pulling out into the gridlocked evening traffic of the city. Tracking her wasn't difficult. 3 months into her employment, Elias had instructed his tech team to install a phantom tracking protocol on her phone. He had told her it was a mandatory corporate security app, required for anyone with access to his residence, designed to alert her if the building went into lockdown. In reality, it gave him her exact GPS coordinates at all times. He had never used it until tonight. The blue dot on his dashboard screen blinked steadily, moving north. She was taking the L train. Elias navigated the wet streets, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his joints ached. The rain was picking up, smearing the neon lights of the city across his windshield. He felt deeply, profoundly pathetic. He was 34 years old, a multi-millionaire, a man whose name was whispered with dread in the darkest corners of the city, and he was currently tailing a housekeeper on public transit. He followed the signal to a mid-tier neighborhood on the north side. It was an area untouched by the syndicate's money, full of ordinary people living ordinary, exhausting lives. The blue dot stopped at a location marked Luigi's Trattoria. Elias parked the gray sedan down the block, wedging it between a rusted pickup truck and a fire hydrant. He killed the engine, but kept the windows cracked to prevent them from fogging. He looked through the rain-streaked glass at the restaurant. It was exactly the kind of place a middle school teacher would choose. Cheap, cheerful, trying too hard to be authentic. Red and white checkered tablecloths were visible through the large front window, illuminated by warm, buzzing neon signs. Elias reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a pair of small, high-grade theater binoculars. He felt a wave of self-disgust wash over him, but the compulsion was stronger than his pride. He lifted them to his eyes. Through the optics, the interior of the restaurant jumped into sharp focus. He scanned the tables until he found her. Nakia was sitting in a booth near the back. The green dress looked even better in the warm light. She was smiling. Elias shifted the lenses slightly to the left. Brendan, the man was painfully, aggressively average. He had thinning brown hair, a slightly receding chin, and was wearing a blue plaid button-down shirt that looked like it had been bought at a discount department store. He was leaning forward, talking animatedly, his hands gesturing wildly. Elias hated him instantly. It wasn't the volatile, explosive hatred he felt for a rival boss. It was a cold, surgical desire to completely dismantle the man's existence. In his mind, Elias was already calculating the logistics. He could have Brendan's teaching license revoked by morning. He could plant 3 kilos of cocaine in the trunk of whatever miserable sedan the man drove, and have the police anonymously tipped off. He could ruin him so thoroughly that the man would never look at a woman again. Through the binoculars, Elias saw Brendan reach down and pull something from the seat beside him. A bouquet of flowers, cheap bodega carnations wrapped in crinkly plastic. He handed them across the table. Nakia took them. Her face lit up. She laughed. It was a real, wide, genuine laugh. Her shoulders shook. Her eyes crinkled at the corners. It was a sound Elias had only ever heard muffled through a wall when she was on the phone with her sister. She had never given him that laugh. She gave him dry sarcasm. She gave him obedience. But she gave this unremarkable, plaid-wearing civilian her joy. Elias lowered the binoculars. The silence in the car was deafening, save for the rhythmic drumming of the rain on the roof. He felt physically ill. The rot in his gut twisted, gnawing at his ribs. He realized with a terrifying clarity that he didn't just want to ruin Brendan. He wanted to be Brendan. He wanted to be the man sitting across from her, making her laugh in a cheap Italian restaurant. But he was Elias Mercer. If he sat across from her, the table would be surrounded by armed guards. The food would be tasted for poison. The conversation would be stilted by the sheer, crushing weight of the blood on his hands. He could never give her this normal, boring safety. He watched as Brendan said something, smiling nervously, and then reached his hand across the checkered tablecloth. He laid his palm open, an invitation. Nakia hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then she reached out and placed her hand in his. Brendan's fingers curled over her knuckles. Elias stopped breathing. The faint ambient noise of the street faded to a dull roar in his ears. The sight of another man's skin against hers triggered a violent, territorial circuit in his brain that completely bypassed his rational mind. He couldn't sit here. He couldn't just watch this happen. Before he could process the consequences of his actions, Elias shoved the car door open. He stepped out into the freezing rain. He didn't bother with a jacket or an umbrella. The cold water instantly soaked through his bespoke suit, matting his dark hair to his forehead. He slammed the car door shut. The metallic thud echoed sharply in the wet street. Elias began walking toward the restaurant, his boots splashing heavily in the puddles. He didn't know what he was going to say. He didn't have a plan. For the first time in his entire adult life, Elias Mercer was entirely out of control, driven by nothing but the desperate, clawing need to break that man's hold on her hand. Water dripped heavily from the hem of Elias's bespoke suit jacket as he pushed through the glass door of Luigi's trattoria. The small bell attached to the frame jingled, a painfully cheerful sound that felt entirely out of place against the cold, suffocating weight he dragged into the room with him. The heat inside the restaurant hit him immediately, smelling thickly of burnt garlic, cheap red wine, and damp coats. It was loud. Plates clattered. A family in the corner was arguing over a pizza. Nobody noticed the man standing by the entrance, bleeding rainwater onto the linoleum tile, looking like an executioner who had lost his way. Nobody except the hostess. She was a teenager holding a stack of laminated menus, and the greeting died in her throat the moment she made eye contact with him. Elias didn't even look at her. His gaze was already locked onto the booth in the back. He moved through the narrow aisles. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. His presence carried a gravitational pull that parted the patrons without them realizing why. Conversations faltered as he passed. A waiter carrying a tray of lasagna stepped backward, pressing himself against a support pillar to give Elias a wide berth. Instinct was a powerful thing. Even ordinary people knew when a shark was in the water. Nakia was looking down at her plate, swirling a piece of rigatoni through a puddle of sauce. Brendan was talking. He was leaning over the table, smiling, completely oblivious to the sudden drop in the room's atmospheric pressure. Elias stopped at the edge of their booth. He stood there for 3 full seconds, water pooling quietly at the toes of his Oxford shoes, waiting for them to notice. Brendan looked up first. His smile faltered. His brow knit in confusion, his eyes traveling over Elias's soaked clothes, the ruined silk tie, and finally settling on his face. Brendan's mouth opened to speak, perhaps to ask if Elias was lost, or if he needed a towel. Then Elias blinked, his dark, dead eyes shifting slightly to lock onto the history teacher. Brendan closed his mouth. The color drained out of his face with shocking speed. He shrank back into the vinyl upholstery. He didn't know Elias Mercer. He didn't know about the bodies buried under the foundations of the new stadium, or the millions laundered through construction unions. But his lizard brain recognized a lethal threat. The hand that had been resting so confidently near Nakia quickly retreated to his lap. Nakia felt the shift in her date's demeanor. She frowned, turning her head to see what had frightened him. She froze. Her fork slipped from her fingers, clattering loudly against the ceramic plate. She stared at Elias, her eyes wide, her lips parted in absolute shock. For a moment, the only sound between them was the faint, wet drip of rainwater hitting the floorboards. "Elias?" She whispered the name. It wasn't a question. It was a plea for reality to reassert itself. "What are you doing here?" "We need to leave," Elias said. His voice was a low, guttural rasp. It didn't carry across the restaurant, but it hit the booth with the force of a physical blow. Nakia didn't move. She looked from his soaked hair to the feral, hollow look in his eyes. "What are you talking about? Are you out of your mind? I'm in the middle of dinner." "Get up, Nakia!" It was a command. He wasn't asking. He was stripping away the polite fiction of their employer-employee relationship and asserting a brutal, primitive dominance. Brendan swallowed hard. He looked at Nakia, then at Elias, trying to muster a sliver of dignity. "Hey man, I don't know who you are, but you can't just come in here and—" Elias didn't yell. He didn't reach into his coat. He simply turned his head and looked at Brendan again. "If you finish that sentence," Elias said softly, the tone flat and utterly devoid of emotion, "I will ensure you never speak another one. Walk away from the table." Brendan stopped breathing. His hands began to shake. He looked at Nakia, a silent apology written in his terrified eyes, and then he slid out of the booth. He didn't take his coat. He didn't take the cheap carnations. He practically sprinted toward the front door, leaving a $10 bill fluttering on the checkered tablecloth. Nakia sat alone in the booth. She stared at the empty space where Brendan had been, then slowly lifted her gaze to Elias. She wasn't terrified. She was furious. A slow, hot flush of anger crept up her neck, staining her cheeks. "You completely unhinged psychopath!" she hissed, her voice vibrating with rage. She didn't care who was watching. She grabbed her purse and slid out of the booth, standing toe-to-toe with him. She had to crane her neck to look him in the eye, but she didn't back down an inch. "You have no right. You have absolutely no right. Walk to the door," Elias said, his jaw locked so tight his teeth ground together. He was barely holding the violent surge of adrenaline in check. Now that Brendan was gone, the reality of what he had just done was crashing down on him. He had broken every rule he lived by. For this. "Don't you ever give me orders outside of that penthouse," Nakia snapped. She pushed past him, deliberately driving her shoulder into his chest. Elias flinched, not from the impact, but from the contact. He turned and followed her out into the rain. The downpour outside had intensified, turning the streets into running black rivers. The cold air hit them like a slap, but neither seemed to notice. Nakia marched down the sidewalk, her arms crossed tight over her chest, the beautiful green dress clinging to her legs in the wet wind. She was walking fast, blindly, just trying to put distance between herself and the humiliation inside the restaurant. "Nakia, stop." Elias matched her pace effortlessly, his long strides eating up the pavement. "Don't speak to me," she yelled over her shoulder, the sound almost swallowed by a passing bus. "Do you have any idea how crazy you look? You tracked me. You dragged yourself out here in a monsoon to terrorize a man who teaches 7th grade geography." She reached the corner and stopped, shivering violently as the rain soaked through her thin clothes. She spun around to face him. Under the harsh yellow glare of a street lamp, she looked entirely broken and completely furious. "Why?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "Just tell me why, Elias. Was a fork out of place? Did I forget to buy the expensive espresso beans? What possible reason could you have for ruining the one normal evening I've had in 6 months?" Elias stood a few feet away from her. The rain washed down his face, masking the tension rigid in his jaw. He looked at her shivering shoulders, the ruined makeup under her eyes, the cheap carnations abandoned on a table miles away. "He was wrong for you," Elias said. The words tasted metallic and inadequate. It was a stupid, arrogant thing to say, and he knew it the second it left his mouth. Nakia let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "Oh, he was wrong for me. And you know this because you're such an expert on healthy relationships? You, the man who lives in a glass box and communicates entirely in threats and wire transfers?" She stepped closer, pointing a shaking finger at his chest. "You don't own me, Elias. You pay me to clean your toilets. That is the extent of our relationship. You do not get a say in who holds my hand." The phrase "holds my hand" hit Elias like a physical strike to the sternum. He saw it again in his mind's eye. Brendan's clumsy average fingers curling over hers. The raw, ugly jealousy flared up again, choking the air out of his lungs. "My car is down the block," Elias said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Get in, you're freezing. I'm taking the train." "You are not taking the train," Elias snapped, the thin veneer of his control finally fracturing. He reached out and caught her wrist. He didn't grip it hard enough to bruise, but the sudden contact shocked them both into stillness. His hand was freezing, wet from the rain, but the pressure of his fingers against her pulse was electric. Nakia stopped fighting. She looked down at his hand on her arm, then up at his face. Elias stared back, his chest rising and falling in shallow, erratic breaths. He was stripped bare, standing in the rain on a dirty sidewalk, completely exposed to the one person who could weaponize his weakness. "Please," Elias whispered. It was a word he had not used in a decade. It felt foreign on his tongue, a humiliating surrender. "Get in the car, Nakia." She searched his eyes for a long moment, the anger slowly draining out of her, replaced by a deep, cautious confusion. She didn't pull her wrist away. Instead, she gave a slow, jerky nod. He let go of her arm. They walked the remaining half-block in silence. When they reached the slate-gray sedan, Elias opened the passenger door for her. She slid in, shivering uncontrollably as the cold leather touched her wet skin. Elias shut the door, walked around to the driver's side, and got in. He started the engine, cranking the heat up to maximum. The vents blasted hot air, quickly fogging the interior windows, sealing them off from the outside world. The car felt incredibly small. The air was thick with the smell of wet wool, damp leather, and the faint, lingering scent of her vanilla lotion. Elias kept the car in park. He rested his forehead against the steering wheel, his knuckles white as he gripped the textured plastic. "Whose car is this?" Nakia asked quietly, her voice trembling from the cold. "It's not yours." "It's a fleet vehicle," Elias muttered into the steering wheel. "I didn't want to draw attention." "You didn't want to draw attention," she repeated flatly. "So you walked into a packed restaurant looking like a drowned Mafia hitman and threatened a civilian over a plate of pasta." Very stealthy, Elias. He slowly lifted his head and turned to look at her. She was huddled against the passenger door, her arms wrapped around her knees, trying to absorb the heat from the vents. She looked small, miserable, and entirely beautiful. "I couldn't stay in the apartment," he said, the truth bleeding out of him because he was too exhausted to hold it back anymore. "I tried to work. I sat at my desk, and I tried to review the shipping manifests. But all I could see was you, putting on that green dress, walking out the door." Nakia's breath hitched. She stared at him, the fog on the windows blurring the streetlights into soft, glowing halos behind his head. "You watched me on the security cameras. I watch you on the cameras every day," Elias admitted, his voice rough. He wasn't proud of it. He offered the confession like a diseased organ on a silver platter. "I watch you clean. I watch you read on the couch when you think I'm busy. I watch you because the apartment is empty when you aren't in it. And tonight you were going to be with someone else. You were going to smile at him. You were going to let him touch you." He leaned across the center console. The space between them vanished. He could feel the cold radiating off her wet clothes, but he could also feel the frantic, rabbit-fast beat of her pulse just by looking at the hollow of her throat. "I went out of my mind, Nakia," Elias said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I lost my mind in the span of 2 hours. If I had stayed in that penthouse, I would have burned half the city down just to give myself something else to focus on." Nakia swallowed heavily. She didn't shrink away from him. She held his gaze, her hazel eyes searching the dark, ruined landscape of his expression. She saw the ruthlessness there, the violence that clung to him like a shadow. But for the first time, she also saw the desperate, clawing need. "You ruined my date," she whispered, a fragile crack in her voice. "I'll ruin every date," Elias replied, entirely serious. "I will terrify every man who tries to sit across from you. I will dismantle their lives until they realize you are untouchable. I cannot let you walk away from me. I am your employee, Elias. You haven't been just my employee for months, and you know it." He reached out, his hand shaking slightly, and touched the side of her face. His thumb brushed over her wet cheek, wiping away a streak of ruined mascara. Nakia closed her eyes at the contact, a shudder rippling through her that had nothing to do with the cold. She leaned into his palm, a microscopic shift of weight, but it felt like a seismic event. Elias exhaled a shaky breath, the tension snapping in his chest. He shifted the car into drive, pulling away from the curb, taking her back to the glass box in the sky. The private elevator ride to the 60th floor took exactly 42 seconds. Usually, Elias used this time to compartmentalize. He would leave the violence of the streets in the steel box and step into his foyer, a blank, untethered slate. Tonight the elevator was a pressure cooker. The silence was absolute, save for the hum of the mechanics and the steady, rhythmic drip, drip, drip of rainwater falling from Elias's ruined suit jacket onto the polished marble floor. Nakia stood in the opposite corner, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She was shivering so hard her teeth were audibly clicking. The green dress was plastered to her skin, dark and heavy with the storm. The door slid open with a soft chime. Elias stepped out first. He didn't turn on the main overheads. He walked to the digital thermostat on the wall, his wet shoes squeaking obscenely against the imported hardwood, and punched the temperature up to 80 degrees. "Take your shoes off," he said. The gravel in his voice was gone, replaced by a quiet, exhausted flatness. "Leave them by the door." Nakia didn't argue. She towed off her wet heels, leaving them in a pathetic, soggy pile on the pristine entryway runner. She followed him into the cavernous living room. The city lights bled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, fractured shadows across the monochrome furniture. Everything in the room was flawless. Everything except them. Elias disappeared down the long hallway leading to the master suite. Nakia remained standing on the edge of the living room rug, hyper-aware of the dirty rainwater dripping from her hem onto the silk fibers. For 8 months, it had been her job to ensure this exact scenario never happened. Now, she was the mess. Elias returned a minute later. He was still wearing his soaked trousers and ruined shirt, but he carried a stack of dry clothes. He walked up to her and held them out. "Bathroom is the second door on the left," he said, not looking at her eyes, but at her trembling shoulders. "Take a hot shower. Use whatever you need. Leave the dress in the sink." Nakia looked down at the clothes. A thick, dark gray cashmere sweater, a pair of soft cotton sweatpants. They were his. "Elias," she started, her voice barely a croak. "Just get warm, Nakia," he interrupted softly. He finally met her gaze. The predatory, suffocating presence he had carried into the restaurant was entirely drained out of him. He just looked tired, deeply, fundamentally tired. "We will talk, but if you catch pneumonia in my hallway, I am going to be highly inconvenienced." It was a weak attempt at his usual coldness, and they both knew it. Nakia took the clothes. She walked down the hall, her bare feet silent on the wood, and shut the bathroom door behind her. The bathroom was a sterile temple of glass and black slate. Nakia locked the door, turned on the shower, and stripped off the ruined green dress. She caught her reflection in the massive mirror over the vanity. Her hair was a tangled, wet rat's nest. Mascara was smeared in dark bruises under her eyes. She looked like a survivor pulled from a shipwreck. She stepped into the scalding water, The heat hit her freezing skin like a physical blow, making her gasp. She stood under the spray for a long time, letting the water wash the smell of cheap red wine, rain, and fear off her body. Her mind was a chaotic, spinning mess. She should be terrified. She had just watched a man single-handedly terrorize a restaurant simply by standing in it. She had seen the raw, unhinged possession in his eyes. Elias Mercer was a monster. He was a criminal who orchestrated suffering for a living. She knew this. She had always known this, even as she dusted his bookshelves and ordered his coffee beans. But as the hot water beat down on her neck, another truth surfaced, dark and uncomfortable. She wasn't running. When he had touched her cheek in the car, her heart hadn't hammered with fear. It had hammered with an ugly answering gravity. She was a cynic. She knew there were no white knights. There were only men who left you to pay the check, and men who burned the restaurant down because you looked at someone else. She turned off the water. She dried off with a towel that cost more than her weekly grocery budget and pulled on his clothes. The sweatpants had to be rolled up at the waist and ankles. The cashmere sweater hung off her shoulders, falling to mid-thigh. It smelled like cedar, bergamot, and him. When she walked back into the living room, Elias was sitting on the leather sofa. He had changed into dry slacks and a black t-shirt, though his dark hair was still damp. A heavy crystal tumbler sat on the coffee table in front of him, half empty. He was staring out at the city. He heard her approach and turned his head. His eyes dragged over her, taking in the sight of her drowning in his clothes. A muscle feathered in his jaw. Nakia walked over and sat on the opposite end of the long sofa. She pulled her knees to her chest. The ambient heat in the room was finally starting to chase the chill from her bones. "Are you going to fire me?" she asked. It was a stupid, blunt question, but she needed to anchor the conversation to something real. Elias picked up his glass. He took a slow swallow, his eyes never leaving her face. "You don't work for me anymore." The words hung in the warm air. Nakia felt a sudden spike of panic. "Elias, I need this job. I have rent. You aren't listening," he cut in, his voice low and smooth. "I didn't say you are leaving. I said you don't work for me. You are never picking up a sponge in this apartment again. I'll hire a cleaning service. You are done being my maid." "Then what am I?" Elias set the glass down. The clink of crystal against glass was incredibly loud. He shifted on the sofa, closing the distance between them until he was sitting only inches away. He didn't touch her, but his proximity was a heavy, physical weight. "You are mine," Elias said. There was no hesitation, no romantic inflection. It was a statement of absolute, irrefutable fact, delivered with the cold certainty of a man signing a treaty. "I am going to clear your debts. I am going to move your sister into a better care facility. You will live here. You will sleep in my bed. And you will never, ever go on a date with another man for as long as I have breath in my lungs." Nakia stared at him. The audacity of it was staggering. It wasn't a proposal, it was an annexation. "You are out of your mind," she whispered. "Probably," he agreed seamlessly, "but that is the reality of the situation." Nakia let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. "You think you can just buy me? Just absorb my life into yours because you had a jealous breakdown in a mid-range Italian restaurant? I don't think I can. I know I will." Elias leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, putting his face level with hers. "I am a bad man, Nakia. I do terrible things to maintain what is mine. You have spent 8 months pretending you don't see the blood on my hands. But you see it. And yet, you got in the car." He reached out. This time, he didn't just touch her cheek. He slid his hand to the back of her neck, his long fingers tangling in the damp, heavy ends of her hair. His grip was firm, anchoring her in place. "You got in the car," he repeated, his voice dropping to a rough, hypnotic register. "Because you know that Brendan Webb would never bleed for you. He would never kill for you. I will do both before breakfast." Nakia's breath hitched. She looked into his dark, ruinous eyes. She should push him away. She should walk out the door, take the elevator down, and disappear into the city. Instead, she tilted her head a fraction of an inch, leaning into the pressure of his hand. Elias closed his eyes. A ragged exhale ripped through his chest. He pulled her forward, burying his face in the crook of her neck, pressing his mouth against the warm, pulse-heavy skin just below her jaw. He didn't kiss her. He just breathed her in, holding her with the desperate, white-knuckled grip of a drowning man who had finally found driftwood. Morning in the penthouse was usually a study in silent efficiency. The coffee was brewing by 6. The files were sorted by 6:30. Elias emerged at 7, armored in Italian wool, ready to dictate the fate of the Chicago underworld. Friday morning broke that protocol into 1,000 irreparable pieces. Nakia woke up in the master bedroom. The bed was enormous, the sheets a high thread-count silk that felt strange against her bare legs. She rolled over. The space beside her was empty, but the pillow bore the indentation of a head, and the faint scent of cedar lingered. He hadn't touched her beyond holding her through the night. It was a suffocating, deeply heavy kind of holding, as if he expected her to vaporize if he loosened his grip. She sat up, pushing the heavy duvet off. The cashmere sweater was still swallowing her frame. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed and walked out into the main living area. The storm had broken, leaving the sky a brilliant, blinding blue. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air. Elias was at the kitchen island. He was fully dressed in a charcoal 3-piece suit, his tie knotted with mathematical precision. He had a phone pressed to his ear, his voice a low, lethal hum. "Tell the Russians they have 24 hours to pull their men out of the shipyard, or I will start mailing them pieces of their lieutenant," Elias said, his tone as casual as if he were discussing the weather. "I don't care if they think it's a bluff. Make them bleed." He hung up. He set the phone down on the marble counter and looked up. Nakia was standing in the hallway, her arms crossed. In the harsh daylight, the events of the previous night felt surreal, like a fever dream conjured by too much stress and cheap wine. But the sight of him in his suit, casually ordering mutilation while standing in the kitchen she usually scrubbed, grounded her in the sharp, dangerous reality. Elias's expression shifted instantly. The cold reptilian deadness in his eyes vanished, replaced by an intense, hyper-focused attention. He picked up a ceramic mug from the counter and walked over to her. "Black, 2 sugars," he said, holding it out. Nakia looked at the mug. For 8 months she had made his coffee. It was a mundane, deeply ingrained ritual of her servitude. Him handing her a cup was a jarring inversion of the universe. She took it. The ceramic was warm against her palms. She took a sip. It was perfect. "Thank you," she muttered, stepping past him to walk toward the living room windows. She needed distance. She needed to think without the magnetic pull of his presence warping her logic. Elias followed her, stopping a few feet away. He watched her profile as she stared out at the city grid. "I have meetings all day," Elias said quietly. "Carmine is stationed outside the front door. He will not bother you, but he will not let anyone up." Nakia turned her head slowly. She lowered the mug. "Are you locking me in, Elias?" "I'm keeping you safe. That is a very polite way of saying you are locking me in," she countered, her voice entirely devoid of fear. It was sharp, pragmatic. "Let's get something straight right now. I am not a piece of porcelain. I am not a pet you keep in this glass box while you go out and play God." Elias's jaw tightened. "The Russian syndicate is making a play for the South Side ports. The streets are unstable right now. You are connected to me. That makes you a target. I have been coming to this apartment for 8 months, Elias. I take the subway. I buy my groceries at a bodega that gets robbed bi-weekly. I survived just fine. Things are different now. Only because you decided they are." Nakia took a step toward him, closing the gap. She didn't have his physical power. She didn't have his money or his guns. But she had something infinitely more potent. His absolute, terrifying obsession. And she was smart enough to leverage it. "I am not going to be a prisoner," Nakia stated, her hazel eyes locking onto his dark ones. "If this, whatever this is going to happen, it happens on my terms too. I want my own phone line. I want access to the building's security system. And I am going to see my sister this afternoon." Elias stared down at her. A muscle ticked near his temple. Every instinct he possessed screamed at him to deny her, to lock the doors and throw away the key, to wrap her in bubble wrap and bury her deep in his vault where no one else could ever perceive her. The thought of her out in the city, vulnerable, made his stomach turn over. "I can have your sister moved here," he offered. "No, she likes her facility. She likes her nurses. I am going to visit her." Nakia took another step until the tips of her bare toes brushed the polished leather of his Oxfords. "Do you understand me, Elias? You don't get to consume my life just because you inserted yourself into it. You get me, but you don't get to erase me." Elias looked at the defiant jut of her chin. He saw the steel in her spine. She wasn't one of his sycophants. She wasn't afraid of the blood on his hands. She was looking the devil in the eye and negotiating her contract. A dark, genuine thrill shot through his chest. It was a vicious kind of pride. He hadn't just claimed a woman, he had found an equal. He reached out, tracing the line of her jaw with the back of his knuckles. "You can go to the facility, but Carmine drives you, in the armored SUV." Nakia considered this. "Fine, but he doesn't come inside. He waits in the parking lot. He waits at the front doors." "The parking lot, Elias." Elias let out a low, rough breath. "The parking lot. But if you aren't back by 5, I will rip the city apart looking for you." "I'll be back by 4, she promised softly. Elias leaned down and pressed his mouth to hers. It wasn't gentle. It was hard, bruising, and deeply possessive. A physical branding meant to remind her exactly who she belonged to before she walked out the door. Nakia kissed him back, her fingers curling into the lapels of his expensive suit, accepting the dark bargain she had just struck. She was no longer the maid. She was the only weakness the King of Chicago had left. Sunlight glared off the hood of the matte black SUV as it idled in the parking lot of the Oak Creek Recovery Center. Carmine sat behind the wheel, a massive silhouette of muscle and tailored wool, his eyes scanning the perimeter with mechanical precision. True to the agreement, he hadn't stepped foot inside. Nakia walked through the automatic sliding doors, leaving the oppressive heat of the afternoon behind for the sterile, pine-scented air of the lobby. She moved with a strange, heavy awareness. Yesterday, she had been a ghost in this city. A tired woman counting pennies to keep her younger sister in a decent physical therapy program after a devastating car wreck. Today, she was carrying a burner phone encrypted with military-grade software, and a man who routinely broke international laws was waiting for her to come home. She walked down the pastel-colored corridor to room 114. Chloe was sitting in her wheelchair by the window, a sketch pad balanced on her knees. She was 20, with the same hazel eyes as Nakia, but her spirit was lighter, untouched by the crushing pragmatism that kept Nakia afloat. "You look different," Chloe said the moment Nakia walked in. She didn't look at the expensive takeout Nakia had brought, or the fresh lilies. She stared right at her older sister's face. "Did you sleep?" Nakia forced a smile, unpacking the containers on the small laminate table. "I slept fine. Work was just complicated." "Did Mr. Mercer finally snap and yell at you for using the wrong polish on his mahogany?" Chloe teased, wheeling herself over. She only knew Elias as the demanding, eccentric millionaire who paid her sister an absurd hourly rate. "Something like that," Nakia murmured. She handed Chloe a pair of chopsticks. They ate in relative peace, discussing Chloe's physical therapy milestones and the mundane drama of the nursing staff. For an hour, Nakia allowed herself to sink back into the rhythm of her old life. It was a comforting illusion. But illusions in Elias Mercer's orbit never lasted long. Nakia left the room to get a fresh cup of water from the hydration station at the end of the hall. As she pressed the lever, filling the small paper cup, the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. It was a primal, deeply ingrained warning system. She turned slowly. A man was standing by the visitor elevators. He wasn't a doctor, and he certainly wasn't visiting a sick relative. He wore a cheap leather jacket that bulked awkwardly around his left shoulder, the universal tell of a concealed shoulder holster. His head was shaved, and a faded, jagged star tattoo peeked out from the collar of his shirt. A Russian syndicate mark. Elias had mentioned the Russians making a play for the South Side ports just that morning. The man wasn't looking at the directory. He was looking directly at room 114. Panic, sharp and metallic, spiked in Nakia's chest. Her first instinct was to run, to grab Chloe and barricade the door. But survival instinct, honed by months of existing in Elias's shadow, overrode the panic. Running would confirm she knew what he was. Panic would invite violence. Nakia didn't drop her gaze. She took a sip of her water, crushed the paper cup, and threw it in the trash. She walked straight toward the man. She didn't veer off. She didn't speed up. She walked with the cold, arrogant entitlement of a woman who owned the hallway. As she passed him, close enough to smell stale cigarette smoke and cheap cologne, she didn't flinch. She walked past the elevators, pushed open the heavy fire door to the stairwell, and immediately pulled the encrypted phone from her pocket. She hit the single speed dial number. He answered on the first ring. "Are you all right?" "There is a man outside Chloe's room," Nakia said, her voice dropping to a rapid, clipped whisper. Leather jacket, armed star tattoo on his neck. He's watching the door. Silence radiated through the receiver. It was a terrifying, absolute silence, heavier than any screaming rage. When Elias finally spoke, his voice was a hollow, echoing void. "Is Carmine out front?" "Yes." "Do not go back into the hallway. Stay in the stairwell. I am 4 minutes away." "Elias, my sister is in there." "He doesn't want your sister, Nakia. He wants you to get to me. If you are not in the room, he won't make a move in a crowded facility. Stay exactly where you are." The line went dead. Nakia leaned against the concrete wall of the stairwell, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She counted the seconds. She listened to the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. She had demanded freedom this morning, demanded to maintain her connection to the real world. Now, the reality of the bargain she had struck was crashing down on her. Her world was gone. It had been swallowed whole by his. 3 minutes and 40 seconds later, the stairwell door groaned open. Elias stood in the frame. He had shed the suit jacket and tie. He held a suppressed matte black pistol by his side, angled down, hidden from the hallway by the angle of his body. His eyes found her, sweeping over her form for injuries, before locking onto her face. Behind him, she could see Carmine and 2 other men in suits rapidly moving down the corridor. There was a brief, muffled scuffle near the elevators, a heavy thud against the carpet, and then silence. Elias stepped into the stairwell and let the heavy door shut behind him, sealing them in the dim, echoing space. He dropped the weapon into his holster and crossed the concrete landing in 2 strides. He didn't say a word. He grabbed her by the waist and pulled her flush against his chest, burying his face in her hair. His heart was beating violently, a frantic, erratic rhythm that betrayed the icy facade he wore for the rest of the world. "I've got you," he breathed, his voice ragged. "It's done. He's handled." Nakia wrapped her arms around his torso, gripping the fabric of his shirt. She didn't ask what handled meant. She didn't want to know. "Chloe, my men are outside her door. She is safe. I'm moving her to a private, secure wing at a different hospital by tonight. Non-negotiable, Nakia." She didn't fight him this time. "Okay." Elias pulled back slightly, framing her face with his hands. His thumbs swept over her cheekbones. "You didn't freeze. You walked right past him and made the call. I paid attention when I cleaned your office, Elias. I know what a hitman looks like." She offered a shaky, cynical smile. "Besides, if I screamed, they would have called the police. And we both know you hate the police." A dark, genuine laugh scraped its way out of Elias's throat. It was a sound of pure relief. He leaned down and kissed her, a hard, desperate crush of mouths that tasted like adrenaline and salt. Returning to the penthouse felt entirely different this time. It was no longer a place of employment, nor was it a gilded cage. As the private elevator chimed and the door slid open, it felt like a fortress. The city beyond the glass walls was sinking into twilight, the sky bruised with deep purples and grays. Elias walked to the heavy mahogany wet bar in the corner of the living room. He poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a crystal tumbler and drank it neat, his shoulders slowly dropping their rigid tension. Nakia kicked off her shoes. She didn't leave them neatly by the door, as she usually did. She left them haphazardly on the rug, a small but deliberate rebellion against the sterile perfection of the room. She walked over to the sofa and sank into the leather. Elias watched her from across the room. The silence between them was thick, but it was no longer adversarial. It was the silence of two people who had just survived a paradigm shift. "They know about you now," Elias said, quietly, setting the empty glass down. "The Russians, the other families. Word travels fast when I cancel sit-downs and dispatch my personal detail to a rehab clinic. You are officially on the board." Nakia pulled her knees up to her chest, resting her chin on them. "Does that mean I get a gun?" Elias blinked, entirely caught off guard. Then, the corner of his mouth twitched upward in a slow, dangerous smirk. "You want a gun? If I'm going to be the weakest link in your empire, I prefer to be heavily armed." He walked over to the sofa and sat down beside her. He didn't crowd her space, but his heat radiated against her side. "You are not a weak link. You are the only real thing in this entire city." He reached out, capturing her hand. He traced the lines of her palm with his thumb. "I have spent my entire life building walls," Elias murmured, his eyes fixed on their joined hands. "Amassing power so nobody could ever touch me. I thought if I controlled everything, I couldn't be hurt. And then you walked in, smelling like vanilla and ammonia, rolling your eyes at me, and I realized I had built a mausoleum." Nakia turned her head to look at him. The ruthless Mafia boss was gone, replaced by a man who was terrifyingly vulnerable, laying his dismantled armor at her feet. "I won't lie to you, Elias," Nakia said softly, her voice steady and grounded. "Your world scares the hell out of me. The violence, the paranoia. I don't know if I can survive it." "You survived today," he pointed out. "Surviving one day isn't a lifetime." She squeezed his hand. "But I also know that when that man looked at me, my first thought wasn't about running away. It was about how to get back to you. I don't know what that says about my morals, but it's the truth." Elias's eyes darkened. He shifted closer, sliding his arm around her waist and pulling her against his side. "It says that you belong exactly where you are." He kissed the top of her head, resting his chin against her hair. Outside, the city lights flickered on, a vast, glittering grid of millions of people living ordinary lives. But up here, hovering above the chaos, the king and his newly crowned equal watched the night settle. The game had changed. Elias Mercer had finally found something worth losing, and in doing so, he had become infinitely more dangerous. They sat in the quiet, watching the empire sprawling below them, completely anchored to one another. There were no white knights in this city, but as Elias's arm tightened around her, Nakia realized she didn't want a knight. She wanted the monster who would burn the world down to keep her warm. If this story gripped you, hit that like button and subscribe for more intense, deeply human narratives. We dive into the raw, unapologetic side of romance and suspense, bringing you characters that feel real, flawed, and unforgettable. Share this video with someone who loves a dark, gripping drama that doesn't rely on cliches. Drop a comment below. Would you have gotten in the car with Elias? Let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Stay tuned, because the next story is going to be even wilder.